Thomas Frank is arguably Brentford's greatest ever manager. He's certainly the best in our modern history. Making the step up from assistant manager to head coach following the departure of Dean Smith to Aston Villa in 2018, few were enthused by Frank's appointment. But as always, in Matthew Benham we trust. And after 4 seasons of consolidation in the Championship, many felt it was time to mount a real push for promotion to the Premier League. However, even fewer were positive after a wretched start. 8 losses in Frank's first 10 games in charge drew concerns from supporters and even calls for his head following a 2-0 loss at Hull City. But the underlying numbers were good, and Director of Football Phil Giles, along with Matthew Benham, decided to stick rather than twist. Frank steadied the ship and steered Brentford to a top half finish. In his first full season in charge, the famed BMW of Syed Benrahma, Brian Mbeumo and Ollie Watkins sped us into a promotion race. And following a mid-season break due to COVID, Frank's side catapulted themselves into pole position. 7 wins in a row from June 20th to July 15th meant promotion was finally in our hands. But losses in our final 2 games against Stoke and Barnsley meant this young side would have to do it the hard way via the playoffs. But more heartbreak was to follow. This time against Fulham at an empty Wembley. Frank would have to do it all over again without the likes of Ollie Watkins and Syed Benrahma, who left for Aston Villa and West Ham. A move to our new stadium following the end of the 2019-20 season meant Frank was the last Brentford coach to manage a game on the hallowed turf. But bolstered by the signing of Ivan Toney over the summer, Frank put together another team that would challenge for promotion. But again, Brentford would have to do it the hard way. The playoffs and Bournemouth beckoned for Thomas Frank, and that's where this story starts. Hello and welcome back to another video from the Mike Live and 5 channel. If you're new around here, please do subscribe to the channel, like this video, drop a comment and share it around with your friends. Obviously, it's been a very turbulent couple of weeks for Brentford fans. The news coming around a week and a half ago that Thomas Frank was rumoured to be joining Spurs following Ange Postecoglou's departure. We got the confirmation a few days ago that that was going to be the case. Thomas Frank has recently been doing interviews in a Spurs shirt. Not sure how I feel about that. Obviously, it's quite a sore one, but I think we've been extremely active on the podcast. We were kind of looking forward to a summer break, but obviously with the circumstances, we've had to jump on the pod. So if you haven't already gone and checked out our kind of reaction to the news, I titled it a therapy session. Go do so now. That's live. We also did a video with Jay Harris from The Athletic, who used to cover Brentford and now covers Spurs. He was brilliant. We kind of walked through Thomas Frank's time at Brentford, all the way from the Championship days right up until he left and everything in between. So if you haven't already checked out those podcasts, go and do so now. The link for those will be in the description of this video. But in this video, I thought it'd be a lot of fun to kind of relive some of Thomas Frank's greatest moments in charge of Brentford. And as I said at the top of the video, it's going to start with Bournemouth. It goes right up until the current season and everything kind of in between. It is my personal choice in terms of the favourites. I say whittled down. There is literally about 100 screenshots that I've gathered from some of these games. And throughout the video, I'm going to be talking about Thomas Frank, of course, some of his relationships with some of our best players, some of his tactics, and of course, some of his biggest wins. Let's just get straight into it. For me, with this Bournemouth game, it was all about pre-match. I think when we talk about Thomas Frank, a lot of the time, and a lot of the time with Brentford in general, that term, fine margins and finding marginal gains all over the pitch, is bandied around quite a lot. But what we saw Thomas Frank do pre-match against Bournemouth wasn't something I'd ever seen any manager do before, at least at Brentford for sure. Running around that pitch, I should say, whipping up the crowd, getting the 4,000 in the G-Tech, making that 4,000 sound like 50,000. It was just another example of how Thomas Frank looks for every single minute detail that could possibly bring his side a result. And the way that he was running around the crowd like a madman before kickoff, it was just brilliant to see. And the bond between us and Thomas Frank was already there. But something like that, before a massive game like Bournemouth, we were already 1-0 down from the first leg. To do something like that only strengthens that bond between the fans and the players and the manager and the backroom staff and everyone there. And obviously we got the result. But it didn't start pretty. The first screenshot I want to talk about with Arnaut Danjuma scoring the first goal at the G-Tech to put Bournemouth 2-0 up on aggregate. Honestly, when he's running through on goal here, I thought it was over. I really thought it was over. When he buries this, the feeling was that it was going to be another playoff heartbreak. Going into this game and going into this playoff campaign, Brentford had the worst record in English football in the playoffs. And just seeing him bury this and make it 2-0 in aggregate, I thought we were done. But obviously we get back into the game, just looking at these screenshots, and this has been such an enjoyable video to make, just going through some of these memories. Look at the amount of hands up in the air. Ivan Toney, Mbeumo, Jensen, Roselev. I'm pretty sure after this, Marcondes literally runs straight over to the linesman, is screaming in his face. Tony buries the penalty, and this has got to go down as one of the most iconic images in Brentford history. Asmir Begovic looking like a man possessed trying to get the ball back off Tony. But this was just a bizarre game. I think once we got that first goal and the momentum shifted and the crowd really started to build, you could sense something special was going to happen. This is poetry in motion. Chris Mepham, who left Brentford a few seasons prior, we made quite a bit of money off him. He's a boyhood QPR fan, to then bring down Brian Mbeumo, get sent off, and really just put it in our hands. You cannot write that. The boyhood QPR fan getting a red card in a playoff semi-final. We know what happens from there. This has got to be one of the most bizarre goals I've ever witnessed at the G-Tech. It's like a half tackle. I think it is 100% tackle from Vitaly Yan out here. Somehow flies into the top corner. And then we've got Marcus Forss doing the business with the third to take us to Wembley. And going into... I thought I was nervous before the Bournemouth game. But going into this one, I cannot describe the emotions because I'd been to Wembley twice before as a Brentford fan. One against Carlisle in the paint pot, and one against Yeovil in the League One playoff final. So not good memories, basically. Not good memories at all. But I don't know. I think there was this feeling, particularly because it was Swansea as well, and there's a little bit of a rivalry there with Steve Cooper the previous year. But I think having played them twice this season, and both times I think we won both games that season, or we might have drawn at their place 1-1, but we definitely deserved to win. I just remember sitting in the pub with my cousin before the match and just thinking, I think this might be the day that we do it. And my God, what an occasion it was. Only 10,000 Brentford fans in that end. It felt like much more. This game was just, it was a joy to watch. Actually, no, I'm going to rephrase that. It was not a joy to watch. Up until the 90th minute, I'm pretty sure I was certain we could still ruin it. But in terms of the goals, if Sergi Canos actually means this pass, I was going through it and I was thinking, if Sergi Canos means this pass to Brian Mbeumo, it's phenomenal. I'm pretty sure he's trying to pick out Ivan Toney there. But Brian Mbeumo anticipates it, we get the penalty, and ice-cold Ivan Toney from the spot. There was only going to be one outcome when he stepped up to make it 1-0. This one, I think if there's ever like, and I've experienced that pure unadulterated joy many times, last-minute winners, last-minute equalisers, last-minute winners, that kind of thing. But when Emilio Marcondes strides up to this ball, I remember thinking it's too good to be true. And the strike is too good to be true. If you have a chance, go and I know I say if you have a chance, like most Brentford fans wouldn't have watched these highlights a million times, but the sound that ball makes when it connects with Marcondes' foot, he could not have caught this any sweeter. It's just a phenomenal strike. And then from there, I just remember turning to my cousin and just thinking, is this really happening? Which is exactly what Marcondes said on the Ealing Road podcast when he came on. And just pure bedlam. It was just, I still can't put it into words, that feeling when that ball hit the back of the net. But this image, Thomas Frank and the backroom staff at full time, Peter Gillam in the background having it large. It was just pure ecstasy. Like, that's the only way you can put it into words. There's no feeling that compares, or there's no feeling that has compared to that day at Wembley thus far. I think the best day of my life and the best day of every Brentford fan's life, I'm sure, and all thanks to this man. And just seeing the celebrations at full time, the way they lifted him up, him and Brian Reamer absolutely loving it at full time. But just seeing those scenes, seeing him hug Pontus Jansson, Christian Norgard, seeing him being lifted up by the players and thrown about, you could tell that a lot of that team who were there the season before, I think you could tell that they really wanted to do it for Thomas Frank, because picking that squad up from where they were and the heartbreak that we felt in the Stoke game and in the Barnsley game and then again at Wembley for Fulham, to pick that squad up and make them go again, and then to miss out on automatic promotion again when, for me, we were the best team in the Championship that year, to miss out again and to do it again in the playoffs, to go to Wembley and get the job done. I just feel like the scenes at full time really encapsulated what the relationship Thomas Frank had built with his players was. And yeah, it was just a phenomenal day. 10th time lucky to take us back into the top flight for the first time in 74 years. Thomas Frank, immediately after that, I think he goes down as the best manager in Brentford history. We're going to go on to some of the big results now. First day against Arsenal. Wow. I think in terms of games at the G-Tech so far in the Premier League, I think this is my favourite. Sergi Canos, whatever you say about Sergi Canos, you cannot deny that he has had some fucking huge moments in a Brentford shirt. First goal in the Premier League in our history. Provides the assist for the penalty for the first goal at Wembley. I know that he didn't leave the club in the best fashion, but this is a picture. And just the scenes throughout this whole game were just ridiculous. The first game with fans at the G-Tech, the first game with fans in a stadium since COVID. It was like it was written. And then obviously new boys in the Premier League launch a long throw into the box and Christian Norgard grabs the second. But even after that, the post-match scenes with Woody, the lap of honour, the first lap of honour in the Premier League, it really felt like a moment to say we've arrived. We're not just here, and I'm going to use Thomas Frank's quotes here. He always says we're not just here to survive, we're here to thrive. And to get a win over Arsenal on the first day of the season, in your first game in the Premier League under the lights, poetry. I've picked West Ham away next, and this, I think, under Man City might be my favourite away day in the Premier League to date. Just because it was the first last-minute winner, and last-minute winners away from home, I think, are way better than last-minute winners at home. I think away games in general, I much prefer. But I think this one, having experienced it so many times in the Championship, League 1, League 2, to get it on the biggest stage was just sensational. Wissa absolutely rifling it into the West Ham net. And these scenes, like the slow-mo, I must have watched these slow-mos from these highlights about 1,000 times when we got this result. But everyone just turned into the West Ham end and just seeing all the players down in front of you. And it was just like, we're in the Premier League, we're still unbeaten. I think this is our fourth game, I want to say, or third game. And we've just beaten West Ham, who had an incredible season that year, by the way. I think they finished 6th, I want to say. But we've just beaten them in the last minute at the London Stadium, full away end, in the capital. Poetry. Again, I keep saying it, just poetry. Under Thomas Frank, Brentford it's been a script. I've chosen Watford at home as another highlight from our first season, and I think with reference to Brian Mbeumo in particular, obviously we went 1-0 down in the game. I think Pontus Jansson brought us back into it, and then we got a 96-minute winner. And I remember at the time, we were a little bit concerned. This was after the Norwich loss. We went a while without a win, and then we played Watford, who were also in and around that kind of relegation fight. Just with Brian Mbeumo, I think his relationship with Thomas Frank and the way he's stepped up in big moments for Brentford over his career, I just think he has come on leaps and bounds from the player that we signed. And I think I was doing the research for this video, and he's always been an understudy, really. I think when we signed him, he was kind of third fiddle to Ollie Watkins and Said Benrahma. You would have said he was the lesser out of the three. Obviously, those two then leave. We bring in Ivan Toney, who becomes the main man, and then is the main man basically until he leaves. But this season, and he would have had this season last season if he didn't get injured at Brighton, but this season, stepping up in the big moments, the penalties, the goals, 20 goals for him in the Premier League this season. Obviously, I think this might be, well, it definitely will be his last season at Brentford. Strong links to Man United, strong links to Spurs as well. But the way Thomas Frank and the backroom staff at Brentford have matured his game. I remember the decision-making in the final third, particularly in his first couple of seasons, maybe 3 seasons at a stretch, was just so poor. He would be a little similar to Kevin Schade and what he's like now. Get himself into such good positions, and then that final product or the decision making just wasn't there. But this season, different player, and deservedly getting his move. Hopefully we can get as much money out of it as possible. Thomas Frank enjoyed that one. I couldn't do this video without including the 4-1 win at Stamford Bridge, and what would be our first of 3 consecutive wins at Stamford Bridge in the Premier League. But I think after going 1-0 down in this game, I just didn't think we were going to come back into it. And then Vitaly Janelt hits this absolute screamer past Edouard Mendy. And from there, it was one-way traffic. If you follow me on TikTok and you follow me on Twitter, you'll know how much of a big fan I am of this first touch from Brian Mbeumo before we get the second goal. Off his knee, keeps momentum, keeps the attack going. It's such a difficult skill when you're at full pace to make that touch perfect. And he makes the touch perfect. Drives down the left, squares it to Christian Eriksen, who again had a massive role to play in our season. Not a season-saving role that some journalists were touting at the time. But in terms of Thomas Frank and bringing him to the club, he was instrumental in that. I think he worked with him at youth level in Denmark, brought him to the club because he couldn't play in Italy. And he did have a big impact. Scores the second goal for us here. The third, Vitaly Janelt, another one. Brilliant little pass here from Ivan Toney. And then a scoop over Mendy to make it 3-1. And then the fourth, yes, 4 at Stamford Bridge in our first season in the Prem to really rub salt into the wounds and make it probably, I don't want to say our best result in the Premier League, because there's another one we're going to talk about next season that obviously goes down as number one. But this one's got to be up there. 4-1 at Stamford Bridge, and these guys were challenging for the title this season. Up next, Leicester away on the first day of the 22-23 season. And I've picked this one out mainly because of this man, Josh Da Silva, and the scenes of celebration that we saw after full time, and Thomas Frank pushing him towards the away and making sure that he gets all the praise, because as we know, Josh Da Silva struggled massively with injuries, and this was his first game back in a very long time. And the Leicester defenders here, they're obviously not familiar with Josh Da Silva's game, because there's no way you let Josh Da Silva have this much room on the edge of the box on his favoured left foot, because you know exactly what's going to happen. And that's exactly what did happen. Bends it into the top corner from 2-0 down to rescue a point and make it 2-2 in the last minute. But yeah, those full-time scenes that's why I included this, because it just goes to show just the man-manager that Thomas Frank is. I think when I've heard Josh Da Silva speak on podcasts, they talk about, and a lot of players talk about this relationship with Thomas Frank. He's their leader. He commands respect in the dressing room, but he also is their friend. And that might be a quality that stands Thomas Frank out from a lot of other managers, in my opinion. The relationship that he has with his players. And you've seen it with the likes of Ben Rama, Brian Mbeumo, Jan Wissa, Ivan Toney, Ben Mee, Pontus Jansson. The list goes on and on and on and on and on and on. And just seeing the scenes of celebration at the end of this game at the King Power, pushing Josh Da Silva in front of the away end was just class. I couldn't do a Thomas Frank's best moments in charge without including the famous 4-0 win at home against Manchester United. I think I could have included all the goals, but I want to include my favourite two. This one because Matthias Jensen barges Christian Eriksen, who obviously left Brentford to go to Manchester United at the end of the first season in the Prem. Pressures him, wins the ball, drags it back and slots home. And then the second one I included just because of this aspect of Ivan Toney's game that I think just goes so under the radar. Ball over his shoulder. Can he play the pass with his left foot on the half volley perfectly into the space for Brian Mbeumo to attack? And we know the score from there. But again, that day, we were 4-0 up at half-time. And I just remember walking out with the people that I was there with and just thinking, yeah, that was all right, wasn't it? Beating Man United 4-0 in our second season on the second day of the Premier League season. Just another amazing moment in Thomas Frank's illustrious highlight reel. This, for me, is our best performance in the Premier League ever, I think. The 2-1 win away at the treble winners Manchester City. Obviously not confirmed as treble winners at the time, but would go on to win the treble. And I've included a lot of screenshots from this game because I felt like the performance didn't even justify the scoreline, to be honest. It should have been 3, it should have been 4. We defended so well. David Raya made some massive saves. But this is like our intent early on from the game. David Raya, obviously the homing missile to find Toney, that was a constant throughout their relationship in the Premier League. Brian Mbeumo gets the flick to Rico Henry, who then knocks it into Frank Onyeka. This should be 1-0 for me. This is another chance. Rico Henry sprays it out to the right-hand side. Brian Mbeumo knocks it back to Ivan Toney. Again, this should be 2-0 for me. Then we finally get the opening goal. A direct free kick forward finds Ben Mee's head. Ivan Toney, loop-in header over Ederson to make it 1-0. And they get back into the game, right? Phil Foden with that ridiculous strike just on half-time. And you're thinking this is going to be a long day because we've seen Man City so many times get that goal and then just put teams to the sword. But they didn't. We, again, were pushing for another goal in the second half. Rico Henry this day was phenomenal. If we can get a modicum of the player that Rico Henry was before he got that ACL injury back next season, I just think we're on to a winner. We've finally got some good depth at fullback. But I'm digressing. But Rico Henry this day was incredible. Drives down the byline and a brilliant block from Aymeric Laporte to keep Toney from getting the second goal. And this is the goal. Wissa getting ahead of Kevin De Bruyne and just see the body streaming forward. Rico Henry's absolutely busting a gut to get in there. Sprays it out to Josh Da Silva. He beats Manuel Akanji. I don't even need to run through this goal, because I can guarantee you that everyone watching this video has seen this goal a million times over and over again. But squares it to Ivan Toney, and the scenes on the touchline, the scenes in the away end were just potty. Absolute bedlam, carnage, whatever you want to call it. Every kind of hyperbolic word that I can think of in that away end was just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. I couldn't do this without including the 3-1 away win at Spurs. Obviously, this was An exciting time for us. We went unbeaten from November to March in the Premier League. We had a few results where we started a little bit, but we knew the assignment in terms of our final few games that season. We had to win. Tottenham went 1-0 up in this game, but Bryan Mbeumo just dropping a masterclass, really. I think this was around the time that Ivan Toney was started to serve his ban. So we started with a front three of Wissa, Schade and Mbeumo, went 1-0 down, but this finish, cutting in on his left, we've seen that a million times from Bryan this season. Maybe this was the first one that we saw properly in the Premier League in terms of him being the main man. But we get the second lovely ball through from Aaron Hickey, who I'm really excited to see next season. Bryan Mbeumo latches onto it, and then another really cute finish to make it 2-1. And then the 3-1 goal from Wissa. And I had to include this just because it would give me so much joy to go to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium next season and do something similar with whoever our manager is going to be. But another incredible day. It wasn't enough in the end. We obviously got that massive win over Man City on the final day of the season, but results didn't go our way. So we ended up missing out on Europe by 2 points. But it was our best season in the Premier League to date, our record points haul. And just phenomenal for a club the size of Brentford to come up, to have a fairly decent first season, finishing 13th, and then to really push on in that second year. And to get some of the results that we did against the Big Six that season was just incredible. Beating Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool, beating Spurs, beating Chelsea, beating Man United 4-0, beating Man City home and away. If there's an indication that Thomas Frank can do it against the top teams in this league and the top teams in the country, and he's going to have to do it against the top teams in Europe next season, I think you look at this season as probably Brentford's best season in the Premier League, certainly by points, but in terms of the football that was played, it showed a different aspect to it because we were playing amazing fluid football in the Championship, but I think Thomas Frank that season really showed that he could pit himself against the best and do it in a way that made them feel uncomfortable. And our record that season, I think, is a strong indicator that he probably can do it at the top level, and I hope he does, to be honest. Moving into the 23-24 season, obviously I'm going to keep this as short as possible. Completely hamstrung by injuries the whole season long. Life without Tony, Neal Maupay returning to the club. There were a lot of storylines this season, but one that I think everyone wanted to end as soon as possible. But obviously, we couldn't go a season without beating Chelsea at Stamford Bridge. Bryan Mbeumo down the right-hand side plays the ball into the box, and Ethan Pinnock gets the first goal to put us 1-0 up. Images that preceded unfortunate events. And then we get Robert Sanchez chasing Neal Maupay and Bryan Mbeumo to stop the second goal, but he wasn't going to stop it. I don't know how he managed to catch up to Neal Maupay here, by the way. I don't know why Neal Maupay didn't just shoot from wherever he was, considering it was an empty goal. But so many good performances that day. I think the wins that we got, which were few and far between that season, were ones of real grit. And we've got a few this season as well, in the season just gone. But some of the performances that day, that was a real coming-of-age performance for Nathan Collins, I thought. Obviously, he didn't go on to have an amazing season, or at least not reach the heights that he's hit this season. But that was one of the games where he was really, really good. There was no in-between. It was really good or really bad. And against Chelsea that day, he was phenomenal. But again, it just points to Thomas Frank's record of improving players. Like, we signed Nathan Collins for 20-odd million a couple of seasons ago. And then that first season, it was a real bedding-in process. He was ridiculously inconsistent. We all remember the game against Wolves where he just gifted them a few goals for no reason. But this season, his game has just been elevated to a next level. And I'm glad that we've got him on a long-term contract because there have been clubs sniffing around. But the way Thomas Frank and the backroom staff have elevated his game to become a very, very competent Premier League centre-half and is now looking like he'll probably be our captain if he stays at the club for long enough, already captains his national side. Thomas Frank's record of improving players is just... it's crazy. Ivan Toney's return against Nottingham Forest, a big moment. I didn't really appreciate, or I didn't foresee how big the media storm around Ivan Toney's return would be. For him to come back and slot this ball through the gap in the Nottingham Forest wall, it just goes to show like his character and his personality. He's a big game player, and I know that he didn't go on to have the season that he would have hoped for. You can't really spend that much time away from football and expect to return in the way that he would have hoped he would. But to step up in your first game and do this, and then even the rest of this game, this goal from Neal Maupay is ridiculously underrated. Mads Roeslev crosses the ball, first touch off the right, onto his left, and then buries it into that far corner. And this was a much needed win as well. We were in the midst of a run of 10 points from a possible 54 during this spell. So this was a massive, massive win for us. And it brings me on to another big game. Purely because of that run that we were on. I think we all came back after the international break that season, all just kind of dreading what was to come in terms of it already been a terrible season because we'd had Aaron Hickey out, we'd had Ethan Pinnock out, we'd had Rico Henry out, obviously no Ivan Toney, Bryan Mbeumo, Johan Wissa, all of these factors, all of these key players missing in key positions on the pitch. When we came back from that international break, We really needed points. And this game against Manchester United, I don't think I've ever seen a more one-sided game at home. It was ridiculous, the amount of chances we created in this game. But Mason Mount obviously puts United 1-0 up, and it would have been a complete smash and grab. But Ivan Toney saves the day, brings the ball down amazingly in the penalty area. And there's Christopher Ajer waiting for the cutback, and we make it 1-1. And it brings me on to another game that maybe you'll be surprised for me to include, because I think the wins against Luton and Sheffield United were massive. But this goes down as one of my favourite away games, I think. Just because we were 2-0 down, and just out of nowhere, we managed to get back into the game. One of the finishes of the season from Zanka, by the way, here. Reguilon down the left, squares it to Bryan Mbeumo, and just an incredible finish off his right foot here. To bring the ball down and keep it controlled, to beat Emi Martinez at his near post, to make it 2-2 as well. Because we didn't really have a sniff in that first half. And then the third, it was a 13-minute spell where we scored 3 goals and just blew them away. We didn't hang on for the 3 points, but Wissa adds the third here. And again, there was carnage in that away end. If you were there that day, you'll know. But an incredible day and a really good point. To come away from, I think it was Brighton, Man United and Villa. Those are the 3 tricky games before we played Luton and Sheffield United. To come away from those games with 3 points, I think every Brentford fan would have taken it at that point. I think you can safely say that was Thomas Frank's most difficult spell in charge of Brentford, with the injuries and with no Toney and everything I've just mentioned. But for Brentford still to finish 13 points above the relegation zone in that season, I think is an achievement. And the wins against Sheffield United and Luton were massive in keeping us in the league that season. On to Thomas Frank's final season in charge of Brentford. And I want to focus a lot on style of play here, because I think our football this season was probably the easiest on the eye that it's been since the Championship days. Obviously, we had that mad run of scoring in the first minute. We had Wissa's first against Manchester City. We went on to lose that game. We then had Brian's spectacular volley against Spurs. We went on to lose that game as well. And then we had West Ham and Brian, another spectacular volley. Similar one to Spurs, to be honest, but into this opposite corner this time. But again, tactical ingenuity from the backroom staff and Thomas Frank looking for those fine margins all over the pitch. They viewed kickoffs at set pieces this season, and we scored 3 in the first minute in consecutive games, and also scored another against Wolves in the 5-3 win. But again, it just points to, and that's why I'm excited for Thomas Frank to maybe be able to bring that level of detail to Spurs, because I know that Ange was so against that last season. And there were quotes from him saying that we've got more important things to focus on than set pieces. But if you can score goals like this, and you can score goals from throw-ins and corners and free kicks, it does give you an advantage against teams, especially like you've seen Arsenal do it this season in the Prem, with how many goals they scored from set pieces. Obviously, they didn't get over the line in the league because Liverpool were that good. But it does give you an advantage. It'll be interesting to see if Thomas Frank places as much importance on set pieces at Spurs as he did at Brentford. I think Thomas Frank's philosophy this season, in a similar way to like what it was in the Championship, was slow build-up play. But when you beat the press, when you draw the opposition onto you, it's finding the space and hitting the space very, very quickly. So in this case, Keane Lewis-Potter against Ipswich cuts in from the left. Vitaly Anout's already making the run into that half space between the right back and the centre half. And then you've got Wissa providing the finish, again against Ipswich. This time it's Bryan Mbeumo down the right, Mikkel Damsgaard attacking that space in the middle of the pitch, and we've got the willing runners, which has been a constant throughout this season. Keane Lewis-Potter holding the width down the left, and Wissa making that run in behind the defence. Damsgaard plays the ball, and we know the score from there. This is, I think, my favourite goal of the season. Pinnock down the left against Bournemouth. Vitaly Anout with a little dummy through the legs to sell Semenyo. Keane Lewis-Potter then plays it back into Vitaly, who's made the continuing run into midfield, and Wissa buries the finish. That was just like, we scored a lot of goals this season, 66, which I think was the highest, or the 6th highest in the league. But it was all about goals. This one against Leicester, beautiful pass from Mikkel Damsgaard, who exploded under Thomas Frank this season. Over to Kevin Schade, who we've started to see a little bit better decision making in the final third. And Wissa gets the finish here. Again, we've beaten Leicester's press in this instance. Keane Lewis-Potter drives down the left. Wissa through the middle, across to Brian down the right, back across to Schade down the left. And it was just a beautiful goal. And there were many beautiful goals like this throughout the season. 5 past Southampton, 4 past Leicester, home and away. 5 past Wolves, 4 past Brighton, 4 past Man United, 4 past Leicester. 66 goals scored this season. And it was a lot of fun watching Brentford this season. It really, really was. But it also points to Thomas Frank's tactical flexibility. I think you saw us win pretty against the lesser sides in the division, but you also saw us win ugly against some of the better sides in the division. So we had a great win away at Bournemouth, great win away at Forest, great win away at Ipswich, another ugly win away at West Ham. These were the results that we started to pick up once we saw that home and away record kind of balance out a little bit. But it just shows that I think Thomas Frank can do it in both ways, and with better players at his disposal at Spurs, I think you're going to see him winning pretty more often than he wins ugly. But he will have to use those tactics to maybe get wins against some of the top sides in the division. But I think what characterised this season the most was the emergence of the partnership between Yoane Wissa and Bryan Mbeumo. And Thomas Frank's role in that, really. I've already spoken more about Bryan Mbeumo and the maturity that we see in his game, but Yoane Wissa was signed as a left winger. Thomas Frank this season, after the injury to Igor Thiago in pre-season, converted him into a striker to kind of fill the boots of Tony first departing and then Thiago as well, who was this big marquee signing over the summer. It points to just, we're not going to panic. We've got solutions in our squad. Let's find the solutions and let's make these players better. 19 non-penalty goals for Yoane Wissa this season. I really hope he stays at the club. I think a summer where we lose Bryan Mbeumo, Thomas Frank and Yoane Wissa would be quite worrying. I know it would cost an absolute fortune to get them all out. Bryan Mbeumo looks like he's on his way to Man United, but he could follow Thomas Frank to Spurs. But if they sign Wissa as well, then I wouldn't be worried, but I just think we need to reinvest that money. And I know that Brentford will do that, but we've still got the likes of Igor Thiago to really play. Still got the likes of Gustavo Nunes to come into the team. Maybe Keane Lewis-Potter's going to be a little bit high up the pitch this season. Kevin Schade as well, I think, is going to have a big year. So yeah, it's going to be difficult seeing some of these names go. Hopefully we can hang on to Wis, but one that we won't see go is Mikkel Damsgaard. And I think Thomas Frank this season gave him a lot of freedom in that 10 role. I think you saw him turn into one of the most creative players in the Premier League, but also just a genuine all-rounder. Some of his stats in terms of balls won in the final third, his turnovers, his running stats, I think he runs more than anyone in the team, bar Bryan Mbeumo. But the only thing he needs to add to his game is goals. And I think we'll start to hopefully see that next season. But the evolution of some of these players under Thomas Frank, you look at the likes of Ollie Watkins, Saïd Benrahma, Bryan Mbeumo, Ivan Toney, Matthias Jensen, Vitaly Janelt, Christian Norgard, like all of these players who Thomas Frank has taken from the Championship and made them into established Premier League players, particularly that spine of the team. It's just remarkable. I think for me, the only doubts I have with Spurs are the recruitment structures in place, and it's a bit of a basket case club. I don't really have any doubts about Thomas Frank's coaching ability, because all we've seen from Thomas Frank is constant improvement, from some of our best players to some of our worst players. They've only got better under Thomas Frank. And I think the relationship that he had with his players will be difficult to replicate, but we hope that the next manager can replicate it. But I just want to sort of thank Thomas Frank for everything that he's done for Brentford over the last 7 years. I think he deserves a statue outside of the ground. The first manager to take us into the Premier League, the first manager to pick up some of these amazing results against the top six. We're going to miss him. It was weird seeing him in a Spurs shirt. It was weird seeing him do interviews and meeting some of the players at the training ground. It made me feel a bit nauseous, but I think there can't be any animosity from Brentford fans towards Thomas Frank for wanting to make that next step in his career. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this video run through of Thomas Frank's best moments in charge of Brentford Football Club. It's going to be weird seeing him not in our dugout. It's going to be exciting seeing a different manager in our dugout. We're going to be on the podcast this summer whenever the announcements get made. I'm going to be making videos on this YouTube channel, on my TikTok. So make sure you keep up to date with all of that. All of my links will be in the description of this video. I hope you've liked this one. Remember to drop a comment, like it, subscribe, share it around with your friends. More and more content to come from what I think is going to be a really exciting period in Brentford's history. This is going to be a transition. Maybe Thomas Frank had us at our ceiling. I didn't feel like it was done with him, but it's exciting. We're going to have someone in. Hopefully he's going to take us to the next level and we can start to kind of really maybe look forward to a European push in the next few years. But yeah, like I said, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I shall see you on the next one.